Good morning, Illini. Welcome back to Healthy Illini. And I'm Matt Schrock, your host as always. And we're excited about the topic we have today. It's one that we've kind of hit on a couple times through other podcasts. You've probably heard the term be brought up a number of times if you listened to us over the past year. And we decided it was time to take a concerted effort and a specific focus on it. And so we're talking about imposter syndrome, and I'm really excited to get into it today. I want to welcome our guests today. I have two guests with us. First is Matilda Smith-Thompson. She is a licensed clinical social worker and has her master's in social work. She is an embedded clinical counselor at the Division of General Studies and also the chair of the Cognitive and Psychiatric Disability Outreach and Prevention Team. Matilda, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Also joined by Alyssa, I messed up. Try again. Also joined by Alyssa Aguirre. She is a senior majoring in psychology and also a counseling center paraprofessional. Alyssa, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Okay, so today, like I said, we're talking about imposter syndrome, and that it's kind of a buzzword in a lot of areas. It's been used. You can kind of see it on social media. You can hear it in our podcasts, things like that. It can be referenced and thrown out there a lot. And that's both a pro and con. We live in a society of buzzwords. We live in a society of what's trending, things like that. And sometimes the words that are used are known, but the origin or the actual definition of what it is not so well known. We kind of gloss over and assume everybody knows what we're talking about. And so starting today, I just want to begin with the basics. When we're talking about imposter syndrome, what are we talking about?
We're basically talking about like feelings of not belonging. There's a lot of internalized activities that happen when it comes to imposter syndrome. So a lot of feelings that come up with that, and it's usually the feelings of those feelings of scarcity, like scarcity of self, scarcity in the, in your immediate environment around you, scarcity in all these different areas, like in your work, your job, your relationships, like not feeling that you're enough. And so that will come with, the feelings of not belonging, inadequacy. And because a lot of those feelings and activities are internal, you'll tend to have an isolation feeling, just that feeling of being alone, like nobody else is dealing with this but me. Like nobody can really understand that, or nobody wants to understand that or understand me. And so feeling like you're siloed or on an island by yourself. When you have all of these like big complicated feelings about who you are and how you relate to the world, which also kind of like delves into being very hypercritical of yourself, like giving yourself these very unrealistic expectations and then holding yourself to them. That that's like that self-fulfilling prophecy. When you don't meet those expectations, then that cycle like repeats itself. And so hypercriticalness of yourself is very much embedded into that imposter syndrome. And I had already mentioned before, like, having those negative feelings about yourself, the world around you. When I talked about like different like life domains, so like school, work, relationships, you're going to feel inadequate about how you perform in most, if not all of those areas, even though like that is not necessarily what the truth is. And so a lot of times we conflate feelings with the truth, and then we combine them, we make those feelings kind of center to our truth process, when ultimately what we need to be doing is, splitting those two, acknowledging those two, validating those two, the feelings and the truth, but splitting them. And then
I was gonna say that's part of the issue with imposter syndrome, is that because it's internal feelings and we feel our feelings so strongly and they're constantly there, that when you're talking about conflating with the truth, that oftentimes we take those feelings in spite of the truth. If somebody says I don't belong, and then there's evidence, clear evidence that someone does belong, but still internally, well, that's not really true, or it's not true tomorrow, or for this moment maybe okay, but in the next moment, and so you have that feeling of that hypercriticalness of yourself, and that makes it really tough to work your way out of that. One of the things you talked about, you laid the foundation really well of what it is, and how it presents itself. But let's dive in, because you talked a little bit about the different areas of life. Let's dive into how that actually functions or looks in those areas. Give it some context to it. Alyssa, I really want to get some of your thoughts, because you are a student.
Yes.
You're a student here, so I want the student perspective, but you also have I won't say unique, but you have a different student perspective, because you are what we would call a non-traditional student,
right.
In that you're not fresh out of high school.
Right.
And so you talked a little bit about how that affects your feelings of belonging, your feelings of success in school. So if you would talk a little bit about how this has impacted you just in your own journey.
Yeah, it's definitely been different in that since I'm coming back at like the age of 30 and coming to school, it adds a layer of feeling like you don't belong, because you look around and everyone's, fresh out of high school, maybe at the most like 24, 25, and you start to be like, am I supposed to be here? Like, is this okay? Like, especially thinking compared to where I was, I feel more capable, but at the same time less, because I tend to like really go between these feelings of feeling like, okay, like I do have this and I feel confident in myself, but honestly those times are very few and far in between compared to the feelings of like, I don't think that I belong here in comparison to the other people. And definitely as a non-traditional student, that's exaggerated a lot in the way that I experience things.
I can understand and I can relate. I started taking more classes in 2016, so I was a 40-year-old non-traditional student, and then COVID kind of messed that up, so I haven't taken any. But it's you sit there with kids basically, and sometimes older than the professor or TA that in the class you walk in, everybody gets quiet because they expect you're the professor walking in. You're like, no, I'm here for class. But it has those feelings of just the isolation, the feelings of not necessarily belonging or even supposed to be there, that you're doing it kind of wrong. Kind of thing. And that can be tough to work through. It's not true in any way, but it can be tough to work through. And that's just in the classroom setting. You can still have these feelings in work. You can still have these feelings in your home life. I'm a parent, and I promise you, every parent looks at other parents and goes, man, they've got it all figured out. And I'm happy the walls aren't falling down at home, kind of thing. But until you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I'm not a parent, but I'm constantly around parents. And yes, this is a thing that they do.
And this is part of the imposter syndrome, is that you think everybody else has it figured out and I don't. And part of this is just my own personal opinion, but I really believe that part of this is accentuated that we live in the Twitter, the Instagram culture, where you see everybody's pictures, but those pictures are very well crafted. That's a very particular picture that, nobody puts on Instagram the picture they don't like. They always put I like this picture of me, so I'm gonna put it on. I do the same thing with my family and my kids. The pictures I like, I put out there, and so it's a very quick snapshot of, hey, this was great. You didn't see the screaming kids 5 minutes before, the exhausted parents 5 minutes after. You see this particular moment, but because we see everybody else's particular moments and we see our entire moments, we really attack that against ourselves and are really just a negative in that way.
Mm-hmm. That is an excellent point, Matt, because one of the things that I am constantly reviewing with students when I have counseling sessions with them is this perfectionism mindset of everybody else has it together when I walk around this campus. And I look them straight in the eye and I'm like, everybody you're looking at is a walking simulation. It's the truth, because, and for the exact reasons that you specified, is because they're only seeing, those of us who are tackling these strong feelings of imposter syndrome are tackling that snapshot of other people and the comparisons that happen with that. And you're right, these are snapshots we're seeing of other people, and those can often be curated, because we're a lot of us are really good at masking, and putting on a public face for people, which is why I tell my students, those are walking simulations you're seeing, just like you, just like me. We have some of our stuff, but we don't have all of it. We mask, and we're also, it's kind of like that Chris Rock joke where it's when you date somebody, you're not, especially when you first get to meet them, you're not dating them, you're dating their representative.
Absolutely.
And so it's like we're a bunch of representatives walking around in an academic setting. And I would be amiss to even not cover how the academic setting in this one in particular can influence the feelings of imposter syndrome.
And that's a great point in that. I was going to also say that, we talk about it happens at school, it happens at home, it happens at work, and especially
Yes.
It happens everywhere. But being on an academic campus, we are surrounded by brilliant people. By brilliant people who are extremely talented, who are so good. And there's some days I sit in my office and go, oh man, don't talk to me because you're going to figure out I don't belong here. Don't come look at my desk. Don't come look at my desk because you're going to see all the chaos that's happening in there. And it can be really intimidating sometimes. Right. And even in, if you're doing a great job in your field, we always look at somebody else and go, oh, but they're doing this or they're doing that. And again, it comes down to that negative, we just hold ourselves to an incredibly high standard that's higher than we often hold to anybody else, and that can make it really, really tough to process through.
Oh,
yeah, and I think as a student too, who is as a senior, I'm preparing to potentially go into graduate school and follow the path to become a licensed clinician, and especially as a counseling center paraprofessional and being able to work with the different clinicians in the counseling center, a lot of times I start feeling doubting myself about the path I've chosen, feeling am I good enough to go into this field, because I don't feel prepared compared to them. And of course I'm not a professional, but I still kind of hold myself to that standard anyway. And then that can be a little discouraging sometimes, because you feel well, I'm not going to get to that point anyway. So is there a point in trying?
Yeah, you can really talk yourself out of some things, and we're going to get to a point where I want to talk about what could be done to deal with imposter syndrome. How do you move past some of these things? Before we get there, I do want to bring up one thing that Matilda, you mentioned, that imposter syndrome is very real, but not everything is imposter syndrome. It's important to understand the difference there. That if you're having a hard time, sometimes it's because you think you're having a hard time and you're not, but sometimes you're actually having a hard time.
Right.
That, just that if there are moments, I don't want to be dismissive of a student here who doesn't feel like that doesn't feel like they have a place. And it could be because they just haven't found that place yet.
Right.
It's not that they don't have a place, they just haven't found it yet, but it doesn't mean that the struggles they're having, or if a class is being hard, it's not just because they're being hard on themselves. Sometimes they are just having difficulty.
Right.
And it's okay to acknowledge that as well.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And so that's where imposter syndrome can get mixed up in all of that, is because there are real systems at play here. And so I'll use myself as a example and a self-disclosure. Though the way that I worked for years, I figured something was up, but I wasn't exactly sure what was going on with the way that I worked, which is also kind of like procrastinating, or like things were, lack of motivation, or lack of follow through, or things like, where I was missing pieces of information, forgetfulness. Like it's like, I'm smart. I know what to do. I know how to do it. But also there's like these pieces performance wise that it was a struggle for me to get together, and sitting in supervision with bosses all the time, where I'm just like, okay, if you only do this, 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 and this, and if you work harder, then you can achieve this. And I'm like, well, I've done all that and I've worked harder, and I'm still having these struggles. What's going on? Come to find out, at the age of 39, I got diagnosed with ADHD. And then I go back, after that opens up kind of like a floodgate of new information that I can now contextualize from like my past, where it's like I probably had these issues since I was younger. However, like as I mentioned before, I'm from Columbus, Georgia. Another thing about me is I went to a private Christian school from like early 80s to late 90s, and so the systems that were involved are not going to necessarily recognize that there are neurotypical differences, specifically in the 80s. They're not going to notice that. Also, I was the only Black kid in a lot of places. So, as we've noticed that, like, with people of color, specifically Black children, their struggles are seen differently than white and non-white kids. It's or not non-white, but non-Black kids. It's their behaviors, their thinking, their cognition, everything, all of that is pathologized. It's treated as bad. And so it feeds into that imposter syndrome cycle, but ultimately it's like, here is what your feeling is, and here is the truth. There are, your feelings are still valid, but here are the systems at play that maybe are not helping you or cooperating with you in the ways that you need to make sure that you are successful in the ways that you can be successful in the world.
And this is why it's so important to address those feelings of imposter syndrome, to find out, what am I feeling and why am I feeling this? Is it because there's actually something at play here? Like, ADHD is not something you can just wish away, and think about and take it out. Is that something that's at play, or is it I'm just being really hard on myself? And they can be both at play at the same time too.
That's right.
And so it's really important. So we've talked about what imposter syndrome is. We talked a little bit about what imposter syndrome is not, and how it affects us. But the big key is, what do we do with it? Because acknowledging it is one thing, but moving through it, processing through it, finding a way to not have it control our lives is the next part. So how do we do that? What are some keys to just to processing through it?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is not idealizing change, or like the idea of what change could be, because I think a lot of us think that we won't be able to consider ourselves as like changed unless we don't experience those feelings anymore. But that's honestly not really possible. Like, you're always to some extent going to feel those feelings of imposter syndrome, but the important part is consistently challenging those feelings so that when you do experience them, they're able to roll off you more easily.
Yeah, and Alyssa brings up a really good point in challenging those feelings, because while they're still valid, it's almost like doing a self-appraisal, like a balanced self-appraisal, not like critiquing yourself like, why could I do this? Oh my God. But more like, if you're having specific thoughts or feelings about who you are and what you do, it could be simple questions like, why am I feeling this way? Where did this come from? So challenging them in a way where it gets you to think deeper about what your feelings actually mean. Because guess what? All behavior has meaning. And so this doesn't mean that like you're acting, you're acting out of, character or acting because you're bad, but these are responses. The way that the way that imposter syndrome works and how we are feeling, those are responses to things that we are experiencing and what we are feeling. So doing what Alyssa said in terms of like doing that, like self-appraisal, actively challenging, because challenging does not have to mean like challenging these things does not necessarily have to mean that you're like sitting in there and like interrogating yourself. Like it really means that you're like you're trying to separate your feelings from what is the truth, and you're trying to use a process to get to it.
And one of the keys to doing that and not interrogating yourself is be kind to yourself.
That's the one.
And be kind to yourself and give grace that you would give others. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I mean, I've heard that, I don't even know how many years in my life I've heard be kind to yourself from all kinds of people. And I still go, yeah, okay. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, because what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
It's like, what is the activity of being kind to yourself? Because like, once again, you had mentioned buzzwords earlier, and, we're really good about like throwing these words out here, especially like in this day and age where we have social media, like throwing out buzzwords where it gets people's attention, but there's nothing of substance behind it. It's just like, oh yeah, take care of yourself. Well, what the heck does that mean?
Right.
Okay, yeah. I need actual concrete, skills and solutions in order to do that. And so one of the things I'll say to my students is like or my clients, because I've been doing it for years, is like the first rule of thumb is be kind to yourself. What is the first rule of thumb?
Be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself.
Exactly. Okay. And then that's when we start to talk about what is the activity behind being kind to yourself. Challenging, like what Alyssa said about challenging those feelings, thoughts, assumptions, is one of the ways in being kind to yourself, because it allows for that grace to happen, where you're really like, you're sitting with the feelings, but you're also like, what does this actually mean? Like, what are my feelings? What is the truth? And then I'll put it, a step further, is like, going to a counselor, a therapist, helps you understand that process more. It will, you'll be in a safe place to like feel the feelings, so that, you'll be, you won't feel terrible, you'll feel bad, because like I tell my students, it's like, yeah, you're not, it's not going to be all rainbows, unicorns, and cupcakes when you come into my office. However, you do have that cushion of being in a safe space to feel the feelings and parse them out at the same time.
And I really appreciate that you mentioned, your clients, you mentioned talking to a counselor or a therapist. Talking to somebody is so important, because where do imposter syndrome, where does it formulate? It formulates in our own head.
Right.
And if you're trying to counter that with your own voice, it's hard, because your thoughts are intrusive, your thoughts are constant, and especially if you've been dealing with it for a long time, it's hard to balance that. I mean, I did a podcast recently and talked about my past a little bit, and I left this campus as a student not in great terms, and coming back was really hard, because in my head all I heard was that negative, and it didn't really start to shift for me much until I started talking to a therapist, to process through that, and that really helped. And so talking to somebody, whether it's a friend, just getting someone you trust, someone in a safe place, getting that opinion can make a huge difference. So if someone did want to talk to someone on this campus, how do they go about doing that?
Okay. Well, what you would do is you would call 217-333-3704. The counseling center is open Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, but however, like on Wednesdays and Thursdays, we're actually open from 8 to 7, so we have extended hours there. And so we get a lot of urgent appointments and walk-ins, so people can just walk in to the counseling center to be seen. There have been times where, you talked about earlier where for a student, it's easier to talk to an advisor or a professor or somebody like kind of like a middleman. It's easier to talk to a person like that than like, it's intimidating to go see a counselor, and I recognize that. So there's been a lot of times where, you know, a faculty or staff has intervened on behalf of a student. You know, I mean, that's literally one of the protocols that I have in Division of General Studies, specifically for, like, we have first generation students that are, you know, even non-traditional students that are struggling with, you know, imposter syndrome, and also just how to communicate their needs. And so the way that I have it at least set up in my department is that that staff can intervene on their behalf, and that's usually like just kind of like doing that soft handoff, like, here's Matilda, you know, she's blah 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 blah, she can help you, you know, she can help you, direct you in the, you know, the way that you need to go in terms of counseling center services, help you sort out your issues, and then we go from there, as opposed to like somebody coming in cold, which does happen. But, you know, I've found a greater response when somebody has intervened on their behalf, usually a faculty or a staff, and then that staff, and then that client, you know, or student, you know, then comes in with that extra support. It doesn't always happen. In fact, you know, we have a lot of students that are very proactive and will call, usually calling early in the morning to secure a same day appointment if you're trying to get in, be seen for regular counseling or regular counseling services. That's when, you know, folks call as early as 7:30. Right. And we also, if you go on a website, counselingcenter.illinois.edu, then you will then go to a place where you can secure an appointment as well, because we do have online scheduling up to a week in advance. Part of my embedded cohort, we some of those protocols can actually be bypassed.
There are people on this campus who were here to help. And you can hear there's embedded counselors all over campus. There's a counseling center. There's McKinley. We are happy to engage with that and try and help. And so it does. Talking about it is a huge part of it. Sometimes just voicing it, sometimes just saying it out loud makes a difference, because we hear the voices in our head talking to ourselves, how we address ourselves. But sometimes saying it out loud kind of solidifies some of those feelings, helps process. I know that's mine. I talk to myself a lot. If you walk my office, you're going to wonder who I'm talking to, but it's just me processing through my day. So that's a major part of working through this. And Alyssa, I loved what you said, that it's a continual process.
Right.
That is not a single moment in time, hey, flip a switch kind of thing.
Right.
It's continual.
Yeah, it's definitely it needs to be a consistent effort if you want there to be actual change. And that seems really difficult, but it doesn't have to be. It's just, you know, as easy as thinking, you know, my thoughts aren't reality. And then, you know, just enough time. If you do that enough times, eventually you might start to believe it.
Mm-hmm. It's like planting them seeds.
Yeah.
Like, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes habit.
Right.
And that's something that I'm continually pushing on students, so that, like, that challenges the perfectionism, that challenges those consistent thoughts that are telling them they're not good. It's like, this is not something that you have to stick the landing on the first time or the second time or anything like that. This is a practice. So, like, there's gonna be mistakes, stops and starts, because you're starting a new framework. You're starting a new journey. As much as I hate that word, I always say I hate the word journey, but I use it anyway. Trailblazing. Okay, I love trailblazing though. So, like, you're trailblazing essentially. So that's part of being kind to yourself as well, is also getting to the mindset of practice and repetition, not this, I have to make every single thing I do, every thought I do, every word I do, everything I do perfect.
It all comes back to that first rule of thumb.
Being kind to yourself. That's right.
It's really where it all starts, and what is the key to moving through this. I appreciate your time. I mean, we could talk about this for hours.
Absolutely.
And we ran a little bit long, but I'm okay with that. But I really appreciate you both being here. Matilda, Alyssa, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed having this opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I really enjoyed it.
As we go through the semester, you get confronted with new feelings, with new challenges, sometimes new struggles, and oftentimes that internal battle can be just as difficult as any classwork that you do. And so if you're feeling some of that, if you're dealing with some of that or have been dealing with it, you recognize that, please reach out. The counseling center, McKinley, if you're in a college that has an embedded counselor, talk to them. All those resources will be listed in our bio. Ways to contact will be there. We want to continue the conversation, whether it's something that you're dealing with personally or you just want to talk about, or you have questions or comments, please reach out. We're here to talk. We want to continue the conversation. That's why we have these and why we started. We want to be a part of wherever you are, and we want to connect with you and see whatever we can do to help you be the best that you can be. But thank you for joining us today. You are on a personal journey no matter where you are in it. You're important and you matter. Your health and wellness are important and matter, and we're here to keep you well to excel. So go have a great week, Illini. Let us know how you're doing, and we'll catch you next time on Healthy Illini.